Our reading for today is from 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 7 through 19. The end of all things is near. Therefore be alert and of sober mind, so that you may pray. And above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others, as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. If anyone speaks, they should do as one who speaks the very words of God. If anyone serves, they should do so with the strength that God provides, so that in all things God may be praised through Jesus Christ. To him be the glory and the power forever and ever. Dear friends, don't be surprised at the fiery ordeal that has come on to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. But rejoice inasmuch as you participate in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed when his glory is revealed. If you were insulted because of the name of Christ, you're blessed, for the Spirit of glory and of God rests on you. If you suffer, it should not be as a murderer or a thief or any other kind of criminal or even as a meddler. However, if you suffer as a Christian, don't be ashamed, but praise God that you bear that name. For it is time for judgment to begin with God's household. And if it begins with us, what will the outcome be for those who do not obey the gospel of God? And if it is hard for the righteous to be saved, what will become of the ungodly and the sinner? So then, those who suffer according to God's will should commit themselves to their faithful Creator and continue to do good. This is the word of the Lord. You may be seated. I like stories about the apocalypse. This is a confession of mine. There's a whole genre practically made for me called post-apocalyptic films. One of my favorite shows is actually a series on HBO called The Leftovers. It takes the rapture idea actually quite seriously. The show begins with 2% of the world's population disappearing and the rest of the characters living in the aftermath of that apocalypse. It is both undeniable and inexplicable. They don't know why it's happened, but they have to live with it. There's another comedy including Seth Rogen called This Is the End, which basically makes fun of the rapture for 2 hours. It's also an enjoyable one, though I don't think I could recommend it here. Children of Men is another post-apocalyptic movie, but the apocalypse is not a supernatural event like the rapture. It's just an unexplained tragedy. All of the women throughout the world cannot get pregnant. And so the world is coming to grips with the idea that they will simply age out and die out. But then there's the pre-apocalyptic film or story, which basically starts the clock and all the characters know that the apocalypse is going to come. One of the examples of this is the story Melancholia. And the basic idea of the film is that a kind of planet-sized comet is on a collision course with our planet. And because of the size of this comet, you know if it hits, there's no way for any of us to survive. But the story that's happening on Earth that the film is following is a wedding with a depressed bride. And the idea of the film is to show that it's almost a relief that this comet is coming towards Earth, because it will just end her very sad life. And then I think there's another kind of genre. Yeah, I'm going deep into apocalyptic stories. I don't think anyone would use the phrase apocalyptic, but I actually think it gets at the root of these stories. I think there's a kind of personal apocalypse story where someone is often diagnosed with cancer and they know their end is coming soon. You think about the famous TV show Breaking Bad. A high school chemistry teacher finds out he has cancer, and he comes to believe that in order to pay the bills and provide for his family, what he has to do next is make drugs. In the show, it actually makes sense, but when you say it that way, it sounds strange. But all of these apocalyptic stories kind of have this consensus that if the world is going to end, if your world is going to end, and you know when the end will come, everything changes. You should start doing things you normally would never do. You were living your life one way, but once you know the end has come near, you have to live differently. But the Apostle Peter's apocalyptic story is different. He says the end of all things is near, and normally that would kick off this very dramatic apocalyptic story, and Peter says, therefore, be alert. Be of sober mind. Pray for each other. Show love to each other. Be hospitable. I mean, if that was an apocalyptic movie, it would be very boring. The news that the end times is near does not worry Peter. He says, in fact, don't go crazy. Keep your head on straight. The normal, typical life for Christians who know that the end is near is praying, serving your church, having people in your home, singing in the church choir, helping out with funerals. The end of times is near. So pretty much go on being the church that you've always been called to be. There's so little drama, so little flair. Christians behaving like Peter tells them to don't look like people who know that the end is near. It's kind of business as usual for Christians. Now, don't get me wrong, he doesn't say the end of times does not matter. In fact, he's very intent on saying, don't be surprised about what you're facing right now. He refers to it as the fiery ordeal. And Paul Achtemeier has this great argument that it's kind of connected to the first chapter of Peter, in which Peter talks about trials that test our faith. And he refers to them as a purifying fire. And so when he comes back to this idea, he's saying, right now, before the end comes, you're going to face suffering. You're going to face a fiery ordeal, and it's going to challenge your faith, but refine it, make it stronger, and prove it. And Peter says, if you know who you're following, this is not a surprise. This is not strange. Jesus was tested, tempted, accused. He was not among the socially respectable. He was often on the outside. And his kind of life is the life you signed up for. But the temptation that Peter wants us to avoid is the idea that we should relieve ourselves from this suffering. That we should ditch our faith in order to save ourselves from suffering. But Peter says, in the meantime, as we wait for the end times, rejoice in suffering, so that you may enjoy his glory. So in verse 13, Peter says, rejoice inasmuch as you participate in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed when his glory is revealed. The one temptation before the end times come is to run away from suffering. The temptation that we all face is to relieve ourselves of the pain and discomfort of following Jesus, which is exactly how so many of those apocalyptic stories go. Right? As soon as people see the apocalypse around the corner, they run from pain, they drown their sorrows, they don't face the music. They try to extract the most enjoyment out of their limited time left in earth, and they change their lives completely. But Christians, on the other hand, we're not alarmed. We know the end times can come, and we know they will come. And we already follow Jesus, so we know that there's going to be a lot of suffering. There's going to be pain and frustration, and we might be socially ostracized. But we're going to go on praying and loving one another and serving one another and being hospitable. And when we experience that suffering, we'll endure it all the way to the end. The Christian apocalypse is good news. I like stories that are apocalyptic, but I like the Christian apocalypse the most. Amen.